which I think is critical for Southeast Asia. I'm a big believer in Southeast Asia. I'm a big believer in open borders and open economies and migratory workforce. And I think there are many invisible barriers to that. And one of that is financial services and being able to remit money and being able to move money across. So in Big Pay, first step was e-wallet, second is spending in reducing foreign exchange, third is remittances, and at some stage we hope we can provide small working capital loans. And we're really interested we've been working very hard on blockchain because we think blockchain is critical in terms of reducing the cost of remittances. They're transparent, they're open, and we're working with Ethereum and Stellar and all these people now as we speak in terms of developing, in Ripple, in terms of developing a remittance service that'll be low cost. When we look at the costs that are put up and talked about by all the opening panel, we think costs can be slashed quite dramatically. We think Bank Negara has been at the forefront in terms of eKYC, but we think more work needs to be done because that's a big part of the cost and a big part of the inefficiencies. And so our goal is very clear, just take the AirAsia model, reduce cost, cost is our enemy, and include more people, just like we did for AirAsia. We reduce the cost, we keep fighting with airports, we keep fighting with governments to reduce cost, and include more people into flying. And we'll try to do that in a small way with financial services. Data is a big part of that, enabling to reduce cost. Getting help from the regulators is a big part. And providing a product that everyone wants and is easy to use. The user experience must be good. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. And one is, thank you for addressing the issue of costs of migration. We are aware of the transfer costs of remittances, we are aware of the recruitment costs, but certainly if your ticket costs less to fly to another country and to fly back, that also means more money in the hands of the migrants, and I think that's why we're all talking about it. And you already went to the second topic that I wanted to raise, and that's about fintech, about new technology, about new companies that are not traditionally in the banking sector offering these new services. And so thank you very much also for giving that example of your own company getting into that into those types of services. I did want to ask one or two of the members of the audience maybe to intervene on this, but I think, did you ask for the floor just quickly? Please, you go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to quickly add on the challenges, more also from the global perspective. I think one statement I wanted to make is on de-risking. De-risking very often is, of course, mentioned in this context also of migration, and especially in these economies that heavily depend on these inflows. But I think it is also to get this right into perspective. I think when Jayla mentioned on the de-risking challenges and the role of the global standard setting bodies, I think it is important to note that the most affected countries, when I just look at the jurisdictions which are represented in the AFI network, are actually the smaller countries, and particularly the small island economies. So we're actually talking about countries like in the Caribbean, Maldives, Seychelles, and the Pacific, which are the most affected. And I think it is important to look at them, because then we also know perhaps what to do, because most of these countries are not members of the global standard setting bodies apparently. So I think that is where the challenge lies. The other point is that these de-risking reactions from many of the providers out there, I think we need to be very particular and see what is really a result of global standards and what is actually a natural reaction to additional regulations to follow a specific business approach, which actually could also mean to exclude low-income customers because they are costly, they are difficult to follow and all that. So I think we also need to be a bit more differentiated on this end, because I do believe that there's also a certain part of business strategy which is mingled into this de-risking discussion, which also makes our life a bit difficult. There are a couple of challenges I would like to mention which are not directly related to what we see in financial inclusion. We often speak about regulatory issues. You mentioned KYC responses like eKYC. This is all there. But there are also legal issues. For example, who can own land, land titles, and then particularly there are societal barriers as well that we are dealing with. When it comes to this high number of women excluded, we have to ask ourselves, who can own a mobile phone? I mean, we see an increasing number of mobile phone ownership even among women, but the question still is who's using it and who can actually manage it. And I think that is a very important when we look at you know, how we can react to these issues, and then particularly issues that we have not discussed, like electricity, access to these basic services, which can also have a certain impact, you know, on financial inclusion, which can pose a technical and financial barrier, as well as the need to building up the digital literacy in many places. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alfred. And so, can I ask one or two members from the audience maybe to intervene, briefly introduce yourself, and if you can speak to the issue of obstacles for financial inclusion, what are some of the new and innovative approaches to address it, and in fact if you have some comments on technology, and that would be appreciated as well. I see one hand, madam. You have, is there a traveling microphone, or how does it work? You can have my microphone. Oh, there you have it. Okay, you have a microphone. Very good. Please.
My name is Supriya Singh. I'm from Aramati University in Melbourne, Australia. I've been heartened with the connection of the people-centered approach, user experience, to regulation and policy moves at the international level. I've been studying user experience in remittances, and I must say some of the disjuncture between policy and what is happening on the ground explains the gender gap, and also explains why remittances are so seldom received through formal means or financial institutions included. So I just hope that we hear more about people on the ground and their relationship to policy.
Thank you very much. Is there someone else who can I recognize? Yes, please, you have the floor.
So, okay. My name is Hugo Cuevas Moore. I am TC, More World Consulting. I've been working with the money transfer industry on the de-risking aspect. And besides compliance is basically the biggest problem that the industry, the money transfer operators, even the fintech companies are facing in many parts of the world. It's very different in the different regions, but the problem is there. Yes, there are innovative banks trying to come up with solutions for the industry, or ways to bypass the bigger banks, but it's a cost. It's a very big cost, banking for MTOs. So the cost, reducing the cost by technology, which we've seen in the last few years, I think that's the regulatory costs, compliance, and banking, it's becoming a big issue in that aspect, and that also influences financial inclusion, because if you don't have banking partners, it's very difficult for the MTOs to partner with other service providers, lending, savings, etc. And you know, banks that are leaving the remittance industry are creating a problem also for financial inclusion. So I just wanted to make those two comments, because I think MTOs are willing to find solutions. We're working with regulators. I know regulators cannot force the banks to bank the industry. They could get more information on why they're de-risking, because I think, of course, there are many reasons. Different regions have different reasons, not only bank reputation or risk, But there are so many other reasons, including, of course, competition. So, thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. So let me go to the next topic, and that is about the role of mobile phones, how they affect financial inclusion of migrants and their families, but also maybe other technological developments, as we've heard already a little bit. But also apart from technology, what are some of the new and emerging trends affecting the industry and consumers of financial services? So, I don't know, Daniela, do you want to speak to that issue, or shall I? You want to say something about that, or afterwards? Okay. Alfred, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, thank you. Well, when you were asking about the innovative initiatives, I think there are quite a number of providers out there that we have seen, particularly in the South, in the global South, when we talk about sub-Saharan Africa, as I said, but also in Asia, India, Bangladesh, and so forth. So we could give you quite a list of these individual providers, but I'm hesitant to do so in the role that, or with the role that I'm playing here. Let me maybe try to narrow down a little bit on what are the common features or the commonalities that we see around these innovations. And I would like to mention at least 4 from these examples. So what are actually the ingredients that could help us to leverage financial services to include the migrants? I think first, we talked about this at length already, is identification. So provide access based on valid identification. And I think the key, and this is common sense, is really the proportionate approach in this sense. So we are talking about tiered approaches, tiered regulations, tiered KYC that in fact take into account that in many cases we, from a regulatory point of view, have actually to deal with low risk categories of actually customers, or in this case migrants. The second aspect is safety, and that I think refers to both regulation but also to the whole segment of what we call financial consumer protection. I think this is particularly important at a time when we see with the fintechs moving forward and the global trends that are there as well. Let me just mention this. Sweden, German, Sweden, other countries, very, very averse to cashless. They don't like cash. We Germans like cash. The Swedes like cash. So the problem is there comes a connotation which of course goes also into the whole context of the global standard setting discussion. The other issue is politicians criticizing the big data providers. We have the Googles out there, we have the Apples out there. They are managing a lot of these big data, but they're coming increasingly under pressure. And I think the latest Facebook scandal has shown that they're coming under pressure for a reason. But what we need to avoid is a backlash against financial inclusion from all this discussion. And this is where my concern comes from. And that's why I think it is time to think about a more systematic, more broader consumer protection initiative. And I think when you continue and see how the whole business of e-commerce is moving forward, with a high risk of further indebtedness of customers, we can see that we have to do a lot more. The third item is inclusiveness. So this is really about targeting the right people, goes to the question of the lady, targeting FDPs, forcibly displaced person, women, and poor people. And the last one is apparently usefulness. That means how can we use financial services, so to speak, the very basic, almost minimalist financial services as a gateway to other financial products. So when you look at these innovations that have been mentioned, they all kind of combine such ingredients. They sometimes even add another one, which is convenience, meaning a value-added service in terms of other services, savings, insurance, and so forth.
Thank you, Alfred. I think I've already signed going up for 5 minutes, so my plan is to actually ask whether there is someone else who wants to intervene, and then I want to give it back for 1 minute to the panelists for some closing remarks, maybe particularly Tony and Daniela. But one area that was referred to already is refugees. We have about 60 million displaced persons in the world today, a record since post-World War II. And I was reading a guide from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and the Social Performance Task Force. And they suggested there were 3 reasons that refugees are excluded from financial services. Reputational risk, prejudice reflected in policy, in public policy in the media against refugees, legal barriers, and I think legal identity is one issue, and ignorance. And I was wondering whether anyone of the audience, or of the panelists for that matter, could speak to the issue and the challenges and solutions for financial inclusion of refugees. Who can I recognize in the audience who want to maybe say a few words? The gentleman over there, you have the floor. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Navindra Lianarajit from Sri Lanka. I represent Credit Union Movement. I'm the CEO there. My comment is now we are agreeing with all the commissions and the cost involved with the remittant inflow, but we are talking about the people on the move, but we should talk about the people left behind in the country, the families. So we are happy that there is a day declared by the IFAD and the UN that the Family Remittances Day. We are happy on that. But we should have a practical solution. If there are social issues arise because the breadwinner or the person, main income earner is going abroad and he is only sending money. But there are some social issues arise in the country, in the families, because children are left behind, then the economic impact actually not harnessed at the end. There are some social impact also. So in the financial inclusion, that thing also taken into account. Otherwise, only the economic factor is not effective at the end of the day. That is my comment.
Thank you for bringing in the challenges of migration and development for families left behind, and maybe that's something that Daniela could also... yeah, the gentleman over there, and then I want to give it to the panelists for 1 more minute. Please, sir, you have the floor. Still green? Raise your hand. I think that helps, maybe. At least in the UN it helps, but... No. It's still green. We wait until it turns red, I think.
I can't reach the whole other.
Maybe the microphone on the... Yes, you're on.
Thank you. My name is Shahadat Khan from RMIT University, Melbourne, Australia. I just want to compliment the previous speaker what said. 800 million people are dependent on migrant workers. And the sort of situation the refugees are facing, we run a project in Bangladesh with the marginal population in Bangladesh, marginal migrant workers population, and we have seen the similar sort of situation exists with the migrant workers' families left behind. So it's a major concern because $466 billion goes to developing countries, but the usage value of $466 billion could be much more if we could have focused usage-oriented program in hand. To my knowledge, we are yet to have any effective usage program or usage value program for the remittance we send to developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, and by the way, I'm delighted to have also the academics in the room because we need ideas and thoughts. Let me give it back to the panelists. Maybe Daniela first, and then Tony, and then, yeah, please.
Thank you. I would like quickly to answer to the question regarding the inclusiveness of refugees. Moldova is facing a small number of refugees, and this is kind of less of a burden, but And in the same time, we managed to ensure the full access to the ID documents, and also we have a brand new law on integration of foreigners, including like refugees and stateless persons, where we providing different type of training, including the financial literacy. But it's very minor to compare with a big picture. The biggest challenge we're still facing is inclusiveness of all our Moldovans abroad, and implementing the handbook of mainstreaming migration to development policies. We're trying to screen all the legislation that it's drafted in order to see if our Moldovans abroad are not excluded, or there are not some kind of discriminatory policies that could affect them. And we have a recent example of the new law of the post that it took them out, and the law was taken out from the parliament in order to have extra consultations with diaspora, in order to have their contribution, in order to see all these additional elements that should be taken on the consideration. And one word of the de-risking, I very much agree with what was mentioned, that it's very important to keep this balance. But one part of reality, I also refer to the question that was asked by the lady before. In the case of Moldova, we faced a few years ago a big banking fraud, and the biggest issue, it was the trust in the banking sector. And it was a lot of work in order to ensure more regulations and more tools for the central bank to have this additional regulation to align to all the international standards for the regulation. And this, in the last years, also proved the trust of the citizens also to use the banks and to have different transfers, including the banking transfers of our Moldovans abroad. Because of all this, regulation is very important also to keep this balance, but in the case of Moldova, it was a little bit different accent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Tony, but I have to thank you also for your contribution to nomenclatura, because I talked about expatriates, and often expatriates are the highly paid migrants, but we're all migrants, whether we do manual labor, or whether we work more with our heads. So thank you, we're all in it, and let's not invent specific labels for specific groups. We're all migrants. But please, if you have some closing remarks on this panel and some thoughts, thank you.
Thank you very much for being panel. It's been great learning for me, actually. I see so many similarities to when we set up AirAsia 17 years ago. I think there's a wonderful opportunity, and I ask regulators to really help industry to get the cost down, to allow people to be inclusive. 17 years we've been battling regulators and airports to understand, to get everyone to be inclusive requires different products sometimes. And what is required by a rich guy is very different, the needs, and we've been fighting for low-cost terminals and lower charges, etc. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and I hope the regulators look at this, because we need their help to reduce costs, to make everyone financially inclusive. And what is required by one person can be very different for a laborer or a worker who's trying to be inclusive. And then the point, I think, made by the lecturer from RMIT, I think is critical. Usability is really important. In my short period in the financial services, it's really hard sometimes to use some of these products. And I think making it easy to use, making it 3 or 4 clicks, I think companies like Amazon have just made e-commerce so easy. And so I think it's important for people who make remittance products or make new fintech products, that the usability and the ease to use their product is available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. And my takeaway message from Tony is it's about competition. We talk about competition to reduce the cost of remittances, but in the same vein, we need competition in the marketplace to reduce the other costs that migrants are facing. Thank you very much. Alfred, any last thoughts? I will refrain from any closing remarks, so we're almost at the end of our panel.
Thank you. Maybe as a last one, I think if you really want to scale the digital enabled cross-border remittances, I think we also need to be aware of the regulatory differences and the specific situations and inconsistencies among the various jurisdictions, which I think clearly shows the urgent need to collaborate, for regulators to collaborate with the international peers to learn from each other, especially when it comes to these key issues that we have identified around KYC, due diligence, consumer protection, financial education, but also transaction limits. So with all this, I think it is very important to at least identify the commonalities and strive for some harmonization. And that, of course, would help those people we are talking about here quite a lot, because this, as I see it, collaboration across the board has just started and needs to be intensified. Thank you.
Thank you. It's all about collaboration. So let me thank the panelists, Tony, Alfred, and Daniela. Give them a round of applause. And it's a wonderful, diverse panel representing the private sector, civil society, and government. So thank you again. I think we all learned a lot. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bela, and our distinguished panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now take a short coffee break. Refreshments will be served outside the auditorium, and we'd like to invite you to take this opportunity to visit our exhibition outside. And also, for those who have not taken the chance to register this morning, please proceed to the registration counter. Please return to this auditorium in 15 minutes' time. Thank you very much and enjoy your break.
Thank you.